Hey, what's up guys? My name is Josh and welcome to another review. Today we're going to be talking about the Ora GrapheneQ. That did not rhyme on purpose. Okay, so a little bit of backstory and explaining what this headphone is. This is a Bluetooth headphone produced by a company called Ora, which was a Kickstarter. The price of this headphone is, for the Kickstarter, $399, $400, and it's supposed to eventually retail for $499 or $500. So I'll be talking about it at those price points. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time going over whether or not it's worth $400 versus $500, but I will talk about that a little bit. So the backstory of this is when I saw the Kickstarter campaign, I was just doing general research into graphene, and I can't remember exactly nowadays, but I somehow landed on the GrapheneQ headphone. And I made a video about it because I thought that the technology was really, really cool. I thought it was a really cool concept. Graphene is an extraordinarily material for a number of reasons. Mostly when it comes to headphones and speakers, it's more important because of its strength to weight ratio. It also has a bunch of fantastic electrical properties and all that stuff that make it great for science. But, in terms of the world of headphones and speakers, that's really the main benefit. And they would use it essentially as a driver material because basically, the less mass you have to move, the better usually you're going to have your sound quality and resolution be on a speaker or a headphone. So I made this topic video basically saying, okay, got this Kickstarter and, it's a great concept. But with all Kickstarters, I am concerned about either the legitimacy and the ability of the company to make a good product and, whether or not it was a real product and all that stuff. And I still stand by those concerns and appreciations. I do think it's really cool technology. I think the envelope needs to be pushed forward even more. Aura found out about it. They saw the review and they reached out to me. They're like, hey, when this comes out or when we're sending review units out, do you want one? And I was like, hell yeah. Like, definitely send me one, please. Like, I want to see what this new technology is. And even though this review is going to quickly go into a very negative space, I want to make it clear that I'm not kind of reaffirming my potential biases from that video. I really am in this with a positive mindset and would have loved to be proven wrong because, when it comes to any selfish nature, it's like I'd love to be on the forefront of a video saying that the world's first graphene driver headphone is like the best thing ever. But to step into the review, it is not. And as a headphone, it's actually particularly bad in a number of ways. It's quite poor. So that's going to lead us into this review. Aura did send this out for a temporary loan. Thank you very much, Aura. And I appreciate the balls that you have to say to somebody who some people labeled as a hater. I was not a hater by my own definition. I was just critical of anything that is on Kickstarter. I'm always critical of it. And I appreciate the balls that it takes to reach out and say, hey, check this out when it comes out and you could tell us what you think for yourself. So I 100% appreciate that. Let's go ahead and cover the build first, like usual. The build of this headphone is one of the beginning disappointing areas. There's a lot of this headphone that was not well made and some thoughts that were just completely seemingly not thought about at all. And I guess we'll go ahead and jump into it. So there is supposedly a little bit of wood here. And that may be actual wood, although it kind of sounds like plastic, but whatever. Let's just call it wood for this example. One thing about the wood is the grain itself looks sort of like the old school Nighthawks before they went with their carbon edition. But the cup yokes and these brackets here are made of plastic. I'm going to assume that it's for protection, but the arm extensions are made of plastic, and there looks to be a band inside the arm that might be made of metal, although I can't verify, and it actually does feel squishy, so maybe it's rubber. But the entire headphone feels very cheap, to put it lightly. It's also not particularly well made. You can hear, and I'm not going to boost the audio, it's the same as my talking audio, but when I swivel the cups, it makes like a gravelly sound that you can feel and you can hear. Like just, it's plastic on plastic essentially, which I'm assuming will wear down over time. I don't know why there was no sort of buffer in that to make that not happen. The extension piece of the headband itself feels just okay, but it doesn't have any clicks, so you don't know exactly like what level you're on. So it's basically free from this point to this point. So the pads are okay. They're removable. You just twist them off. They've got this big plastic kind of frame around them that kind of clips on to the ear cup, which the inside of the ear cup, you have the driver in this really high up position here. And then the rest of this is just kind of cheap plastic. It's not really that impressive. I can't really see the driver too well, and I'm not going to take this apart because it's not my headphone, and I'm not going to spend $400 if I break this thing. And I'm certainly not going to admit to opening it on video. But the driver looks particularly small. It's also in a weird place, and I'll explain why. So you see that the entire ear-shaped cup here, which I commend them for using the ear shape. I think that's the superior shape for headphone designs, just for comfort. But it's on the upper side. So normally this wouldn't be that big of a deal, except for the actual headphone itself doesn't really fit that many heads. So I have a medium-sized head, and for a little bit of a comparison from what people know, this is an HD58X, same as the 600, 650, 660S, and I'm about that far up on the headband. And for reference, the headband goes all the way up there, and I'm about there. Okay, like I think it's like 4 or 5 clicks up. This fits my head perfectly about this level. This headphone, I know people personally who can max out this headphone for like the length of the actual headband sticking up. So I'm about a medium-sized head. I don't have a massive head, and I've got pretty small ears compared to the size of my head. And this headphone doesn't really fit on the lowest setting. It's like at the very top. I'm sorry, it's at the very bottom of my earlobe, touching at the bottom of this. So that the driver, when you listen to it like this, sounds like it's coming from up here, and I'm hearing sounds all up here. So you say, okay, we'll make it fit, right? Extend the piece. So you make it fit, and for me, all the way extended is just about a perfect fit in terms of the height. So the height of the driver is right about here, right about this kind of upper range. And that's right where it kind of rests just barely off the top of my ear. So it fits my head in terms of height just about perfectly, but that's at the max extension. And like I said, I got a medium-sized head. So if you have a large-sized head, this simply is not going to fit. Now that's just one of the issues with the fit of this. The other issue is that these cups do not articulate out and in. So they don't swivel out. They don't move at all. And since this headphone kind of comes to a point, you'll see that when you actually close the headphone, the part with the most pressure is this bottom point here. And since it can't articulate to be flat on your ear like most other headphones can, it ends up, when you put it on, having a lot of pressure down here, kind of at the very top of my jaw, and very little pressure up here. It's actually almost a broken seal up here for me. So it ends up feeling like it's kind of clamping down here, kind of pinching underneath your jaw. That is just like, in terms of the fit, it's not going to fit like half the people. Because if I'm a medium, that means that I'm kind of the average, and I don't know where my ears are placed in reference to my skull compared to the average, but I've always kind of been a medium for like everything. And so for this to be that big of an oversight is kind of silly to me, but I'll stop harping on that and start harping on some other things of the build. One, the headband. It looks comfortable. It's got this kind of this material that reminds me of the pads, the actual fabric part of the pad from the Headphone Sandara. It's got that on the top, but it's kind of this one like tiny layer of foam that's maybe about that thick, and then just hard plastic underneath. So when you put this on, all I feel is just a hard plastic bar on the top of my head. So it's not particularly comfortable either, even when it does fit. And then some other things about the build. The cups, this is the right ear, this is the left ear. They swivel this way, but they don't swivel the other way. So you can't take this off and put it down on your desk in the same orientation on the pads, which I always recommend doing because the pads are there to kind of take the absorption. You don't have to put it down on a hard surface, so you don't risk scratching the headphones or the surface. You can just put it straight on the pads and the headband. But it doesn't do that. So that's not a massive oversight. It's more just like a minor complaint, but still not a very well thought out design. Then to continue on the not well thought out designs, on one of these little graphene icons here, there's a button. This is actually on the left side. Now, when you power the button on, that's used for play, pause, power on, power off by pressing and holding. Now, when you power the button, or when you push the button and you power it on, the annoying part is that if you're just picking this headphone up and pressing it like this, the light for the power is on the other headphone. So it's on the other side. So you have to make sure that you can see that it's being powered on properly and that it's available for pairing if you need to pair it. So you actually have to look at both sides to know that it's powering on. Although it does give you a little audio cue, so that is a benefit, but there's not really a reason that I can think of why the light couldn't be on the same side as the actual power button, so you can just power it on with one hand and see that it's powered on. Okay, so closing statements on the plastic build. It's hard to explain how cheap this feels. Like if you've held an Odyssey headphone or a really premium quality headphone, you'll know that type of feeling that it has, where it feels very structurally sound. And then you'll pick up something like a 5.8X, which is plastic, but it still feels robust. It doesn't make a lot of noise when you move it around. It's a pretty solid plastic build, but it is plastic. And let's call that like a 4. Well, this is like a 2. It feels like just a cheap kind of crappy headphone, unfortunately. That's just how I feel about it. Okay, so enough about the build. Okay, now to touch on the functionality briefly, it's not an extraordinarily like crazy functioning Bluetooth device. It's pretty much just average. It's got power on, power off, play, pause, skip, repeat, stuff like that. And that all works pretty well. It paired really easily with my iPhone. And there's a USB-C mode, although I don't have a USB-C device that I can test on whether or not it plays as an audio device via USB-C. I'll defer to their Kickstarter page for that information if it's on there. I tested this in 2 ways. One is the 3.5 millimeter on the right side of the ear cup out of both my THX 789, my Topping DX7S, and that iFi IDSD Pro back there. It's like a $2,400 DAC amp. It sounds bloody amazing. And my conclusions about the sound is that pretty much top to bottom, this just has really bad performance. It is not good in any way. It is not worth $400 in any way, in my opinion. All of this is my subjective opinion and objective experience. So let's start off with the potential benefits that a graphene driver would have. Theoretically, shouldn't flex a whole lot. And when something flexes, you can have certain negative things like just a lack of resolution, or certain like frequencies will cancel out other frequencies and stuff like that if it's flexing too hard. There's just a lot of negative stuff that graphene theoretically could fix. You also are talking about a driver that, if ran by really, really good magnets, could be incredibly resolving, and theoretically even more resolving than super high-end dynamic drivers of today's standard, like the HD 800S, or really high-end electrostatic drivers, or higher-end planar magnetic drivers. So graphene really could theoretically be kind of the answer to everything. And you'd have this incredible resolution, this incredible clarity, and you could theoretically, again, theory, you could tune the sound to be just about any way you want by different housings and different magnet arrays and structures and different coilings and lengths and long throw, short throw, and your rubber surround of the actual driver. So there's a lot of ways you could adjust the sound on it, just like every headphone and every other driver type. But I'm not an audio engineer. But listening to this, it seems to me that neither was the person who made the sound. And I know that's a pretty harsh statement, and I don't mean it to be rude, but this thing is really, really bad. So let's go ahead and start off with the treble response. The treble response in the lower treble is forward. It is kind of bright, it's kind of harsh. It's surprisingly not sibilant, but it's quite forward. On the upper end of treble, like above, let's say 10 to 15K, when you get into the air frequencies, there's not really anything there. There's no details, which is one of the stronger arguments for graphene, or for a graphene headphone. There is no details in the top end anywhere. Like anywhere in the treble response, it just does not sound detailed, even compared to a relatively average treble performing headphone, the 5.8X, which is a great headphone, by the way, but not a particularly massively well-resolving headphone by my definition, at least. And the Ora is so far beyond that it's just bad. There's zero resolution. There is zero air. There is basically no top information. It is just like a lot of forward treble in the lower treble response. Now, this forwardness or boost in the treble response goes into the upper mid-range. So one of the characteristics that you'll most likely pick up on when you first hear this is how incredibly shouty the upper mid-range is. And shouty, to me, is different than forwardness. The 58X and 6XX and 600s are mid-range forward headphones. So they have this really present body to the mid-range, to the vocalist. They have this great level of forwardness where the mid-range is separated. This is just upper mid-range played at like a 10, while everything else is like a 5 or a 6 in terms of loudness. It is super shouty. So you'll be listening to a song where the vocalist starts kind of, going at it a little bit, especially with females. Like think Adele. Adele's Hello is a perfect song. So when she's kind of doing the non-chorus part of the song, where she's kind of singing at like a regular level, it sounds okay in terms of volume. When she goes to that like Hello from the Other Side thing, it is painfully loud. And again, not really well resolving, not very well separated from the rest of the music. It's surprisingly both loud and not forward. So it doesn't have this forward delivery. It's got this kind of relatively flat delivery with the rest of everything else in terms of placement. But it's just so loud and so shouty. It's probably the shoutiest headphone I think I've ever listened to. And it makes for a very unpleasant experience. Lower mid-range is kind of dipped. Like it's a pretty big dip, especially in comparison to the upper mid-range. So you get vocals like Avi Kaplan, who is incredibly deep. Used to be the bass from the a cappella band Pentatonics. He has an incredibly powerful voice, and this headphone just like castrates that basically. It just sucks. It just sucks. It's very unfortunate. And he's a vocalist that can overpower a lot of headphones that are bad in the upper or the lower mid range. Not this one. This one just has very little detail, very little lower end kind of dynamic capability. Also, speaking of dynamics, that upper end, it's not a dynamic headphone in a good way, because the dynamics for a headphone to be good should be overall. So if treble is just blasting compared to the rest of the music, a headphone with proper dynamics will blast that treble. And same thing with the bass. If it has proper dynamics, if the bass is blasting, it will blast the bass. And same thing with the mid-range. But this is specifically just upper mid-range, like blasting at kind of those higher, more, forward notes. Okay. So mid-range is poor, treble is poor, no detail, no separation, no level of refinement on either side, no real characteristics. It's a very dull sound. And bass is the same way. I don't know what measurement system they're using, but it is horrible. It is not accurate for, again, what I'm hearing. I will wait for people with better measurement rigs to come out with measurements for this. I can pretty much guarantee that this headphone will not measure anything like they measured it on anybody else's rig. I don't know if that was a theorized measurement or their target measurement that they were trying to achieve, or if they got one headphone and tuned it specifically to measure that way, but this thing is not good. So when it comes to the bass response, this is another thing where the bass response on a graph, it looks pretty, not necessarily decent, because that's going to be subjective, but it looks like it's present. And this headphone does have bass. It's got a little bit of bass, but again, the quality is just not good. The dynamics are poor. The low end of bass response here is fairly low. It can hit quite low if that's all the driver is doing, but it just doesn't really sound like a quality level of bass response. It kind of just seems like a cheap Bluetooth headphone that all it can do is bass with no level of refinement, and all it's got is just pure bass output. And that's the only characteristic that the bass response has. It's extremely one-noted, so you can listen to bass from a cello and bass from an organ, And if you cut out like everything above 100 hertz, the bass is going to sound about the same. Like you can tell it from like the other frequencies, like it's not that horrible. But if you're just basing it on the bass response timbre characteristics, it's just extremely singular noted and really disappointing. So bass response, treble, mid-range, for the price, like a 2 out of 10 on all fronts. It's really quite poor. Imaging and soundstage, which is another huge selling point that they've offered here, and theoretically, again, it should measure up. It should be fantastic. The imaging, it's got a stereo image. I don't see how it couldn't. Basically, everything that has 2 drivers will have a stereo image, but it's not particularly well defined, and it's stronger on the outsides of the cup than on the middle. So Yoshihiro Kawa's Spaces, which is an incredible imaging album. The first song on that album, Timbers, which has these little beads that drop and they kind of start off from the middle and they kind of splay out. Well, the funny thing is it's louder when it first drops in the middle and then kind of gets quieter and quieter in the recording as it goes out. On this headphone though, it sounds the opposite. It's like quieter in the middle and gets louder and louder as it goes out because it doesn't image in the center very well. And the level of refinement is not very forward there. And it just ends up being a pretty disappointing experience. Now, soundstage, they low-key equate this to kind of listening to speakers. Like they show this head and they show a normal pair of headphones where it's got this kind of they show kind of the field at how it's playing. And then they have the GrapheneQ headphones, which are, really far out for soundstage, and it sounds like it's a pair of speakers. And my opinion is that is just horseshit. These don't sound wide at all. They don't sound close. They don't sound wide. They just kind of sound like sound is coming from exactly where the drivers are and not in a particularly well illusioned way. Like you can have a HD 800S here, which is an incredibly wide sound staging headphone. And if you close your eyes, like it can provide an illusion of like, okay, that sound is coming from way out here. Not with this. This just always sounds like where it is. So if I had to force myself to compliment one thing about this headphone is it does do a good job of blocking out sound. Like sounds, just ambient stuff is pretty quiet on this. Not the quietest I've heard. It doesn't compare to any sort of active noise cancellation or anything like that, but it does block out. So for a closed back headphone, if the purpose is to block out like ambient office noise, this is going to be great for that. So in conclusion, unfortunately, I think there is going to be a lot of very unhappy customers. Even my girlfriend, I came in here, or she came in here and I had her to listen to it. And I had her listen to the 5.8X first and then listen to that. And she doesn't give 2 fucks about audio. She does not care. And she was kind of like, well, it sounds like sound, but there's no like, I forget what she said. It was like something like there's no life to it. Like it doesn't have any quality to the music. I think that's a perfect statement. There's no life, there's no details, there's no like massive amounts of information that they really made this headphone out to seem like it had. It is just it's a bad headphone. It is a bad headphone. It is unpleasant to listen to. It is harsh in the upper mid-range. There is no benefits that I can see over any other headphone near its price range. Even like $100 headphones, lots of $100 headphones can beat this out, which is unfortunate. I really wanted to have a positive experience with this because I think theoretically it's a really great concept. It's probably the worst headphone of 2019, I would imagine. I can't imagine things being much worse. So I think that's going to wrap it up. I'm very sorry, Ora. I do apologize for such a harsh review. I know this is probably not what you guys were expecting and or hoping, but I got to be honest, my findings in every video, and this headphone is just, it is just bad. And I think you guys are going to have a lot of explaining to do to a lot of customers. I think that's going to wrap it up. Thank you guys very much for watching. Stay tuned for more reviews. Usually they're more positive than this. So until the next video, my name is Josh, signing off.